Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen King Cast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication, and today is a treat. Today is the episode more than any other episode that has ever been asked for. You know the real ones out there. You know that you've asked for it. You know that you've wanted it. You have asked me for years. What are your thoughts, constant reader, on 1997's Mick Garris directed, Fox airing two-part edition of Quicksilver Highway? Tell me your thoughts. Well, after long last, after all these years, after all these centuries, you're going to get my thoughts on 1997's Mick Garris's directed Quicksilver Highway. I'll talk all about Quicksilver Highway in a second, but first, more than anything else, I wanted to say thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for hitting play on whatever podcast platform you use, whether it's Apple Podcasts or YouTube or Spotify or Amazon. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy life to listen to my thoughts on Stephen King. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. For those of you who have been tuning in for years and for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, thank you and welcome. So before we get to Quicksilver Highway, I just wanted to share a couple things related to the Stephen King cast. As you know, this show has been going on since 2014, but over the last year, actually less than the last year, over the last few months, I have revamped this podcast. So here is how to listen to the Stephen King cast. So when it first began, I started at Carrie and I made my way through all of the books in chronological order of publication, and any of the adaptations of any of the books or the stories were attached following the primary text review. So for instance, if you were looking for Brian De Palma's Carrie, all you would have to do is just go to the Carrie review, and then shortly after the Carrie review, you would have the Brian De Palma version, and then the 2013 edition as well. Same thing for something like It. If you wanted to, at the time, listen to my thoughts on the Tim Curry starring ABC TV miniseries, you would go to the review of the text It, and then in the podcasts following that, the podcast episodes following that, you would find the ABC TV miniseries. However, here is the problem that wound up coming along is you would find podcast reviews seemingly out of order. So for instance, because the podcast was airing in real time as new adaptations were occurring, things weren't organized nicely. So when I was recording in 2017, I had by that point already reviewed It, the original work, and I had already reviewed the ABC TV miniseries. So when the Bill Skarsgård version of the movie came out, that was at the top of the feed, naturally so, as it should be. And so you would get my reviews there. So for longtime listeners, all you had to do was just stay in the know. But for anyone coming on for the first time, there wasn't, all of a sudden, there just wasn't order where the whole purpose of the podcast had been to be ordered. So I say all of this because now I have gone through and I have reordered and restructured everything so that it is nice and it is clean, so that if you want to spend some time within the world of dairy, for instance, just find that the review for the book, and everything that follows after that, you will have the adaptations related to that primary text. So consider the podcast like Suns in the Galaxy. And around each sun, the gravitational pull will have all of the planets revolving around that sun. So each primary text is the sun, and all the adaptations are the planets that are orbiting around the sun. Another way of looking at it is the podcast is like a line of trees going down a row. So one tree is Carrie, the next tree in line is Salem's Lot, the next tree in line is The Shining. Okay, now springing off of these trees are the branches, and what the branches are the adaptations. So on the branch on the Carrie tree branching off, you have a limb that is the Brian De Palma movie, and you have a limb that is the 2013 remake, and then the next tree in line is Salem's Lot, and then so the primary tree is the review of the text, but then we have a branch that is the Tobe Hooper adaptation, and then another branch is the 2004 Rob Lowe starring remake, and then another branch is the 2024 adaptation. So that's what the podcast will function like. So if you are tuning in for the first time and you're listening to this, please note that there is an entire back catalog for you to listen to based on the reviews of the texts and the adaptations related to the text. So for every published Stephen King work that you get the review of that book or short story. If it's a book, you also get a review specifically of the ending of the story of that book as well, because upon my conclusion of my initial focus of the podcast, which was to review each of his works in the chronological order of publication, what I wound up doing was I wound up going into the texts again and starting from the beginning, except this time I looked specifically at the endings because Stephen King has a reputation for not being able to end his stories. So I wanted to look at that through a critical lens. So what I have done is I have attached the review for each one of those books with that original review. So for instance, going back to Carrie, you have the Carrie episode in which I review Carrie, the book by Stephen King, and then the next episode will be a review of the ending to Carrie specifically to determine whether or not King is able to successfully land the plane on Carrie, and then you'll get the adaptations. Okay, so every book has a corresponding review talking about the ending as well. So I just kind of wanted everyone to know where you can find podcast episodes that you might be looking for. If you're making your way through the podcast episodes and there's a gap, so for instance, maybe it might jump from there might be one episode that's like 160, and then the next episode is 165. You might be wondering where episodes 161, 162, 163, and 164 are. Well, I have slotted those as episodes that I need to get to. So there is a gap there because I have just identified that as needing to review episodes and then place them there. For instance, Quicksilver Highway, which I'll be getting to in a bit. One of the adapted works here is from from one of the short stories within Nightmares and Dreamscapes. So when this is published, it's going to go to the top of the feed because it's a new episode. But after a few weeks, I will remove it from the top of the feed and I will place it where it needs to be in the chronological order of the podcast, which will be with the other Nightmares and Dreamscapes episodes. So right now in that area of the podcast, there is a missing episode that's going to be filled in once Quicksilver Highway, this review, has had time to sit at the top of the feed. I will place it where it needs to be later on so that everything is fresh and everything is where it's supposed to be. So that's how to access the Stephen King Cast in podcast form. But Stephen King Cast is more than just a podcast. It is just a way to experience Stephen King in multiple formats and ways. So what you can do is you can just head on over to stephenkingcast.com, and at that website you will, if there's new news, you can find some news there for Stephen King, but you can find a way to access the podcast however you see fit. There are collections that are available for you, and it's curated by topic, by theme, by geographical location for Stephen King works. So for instance, if you just wanted to explore the sewers of Derry, Maine, there is a Derry collection for you that will include the 3-part It review, the analysis of the conclusion of It, the connections between It and the Dark Tower, the ABC TV miniseries, a 2-part 2017 movie review, a 2-part It Chapter 2 review, and It Welcome to Derry review. As well, you will also get other Derry-related material, such as Insomnia, my review of Insomnia within Derry as well. So all of the stories pertaining to Derry, Maine will be included in that curated collection right there for you. Same thing with the Dark Tower. If you just want to focus on the Dark Tower and get all of the reviews of the Dark Tower without having to hunt and peck and search through the podcast feed, just go to stephenkingcast.com and click on the Dark Tower collection. Everything will be laid out very nicely for you right there. Same thing with all of the top 10 lists for Stephen King that I did, all of the movie adaptations, all of the TV adaptations, all of the collections of short stories for you. Everything related to Castle Rock will be there for you. All of the Holly Gibney stories will be there right for you. So all of this podcast, there are many, many episodes, and there's many ways to be able to access the Stephen King multiverse, and going to stephenkingcast.com will be something there for you that has been curated to meet your needs. Also, you can find the Stephen King Cast on any podcast platform that you like to listen to. So it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Spotify, it's on Amazon, it's on YouTube, it's everywhere. So all that I ask is that if you have any time on your hands, please leave a review on any of the podcast platforms. That would greatly help me out. Now, I just mentioned Spotify. You can search for Stephen King Cast on Spotify. You can also search for Constant Reader on Spotify. If you go to Constant Reader, you will find playlists for all of the Stephen King stories. And what's fun about these playlists is either there are the musical selections there are ones either overtly announced by Stephen King in the text, or the movie adaptation. So for instance, It. Okay, let's stick with the world of It. So clearly something like A Smile and a Ribbon, which was the theme song to It Welcome to Derry, that's in there. But also a song like No Surrender by Bruce Springsteen, which was within the text of It, is in there. And other songs that are related either to the Clowns or Growing Up or The Losers are all in there. So there you have nice playlists that are thematically linked to a particular text that's there. Also included within those playlists are the reviews of the text or adaptation as well. So that's another multimedia way of being able to access the Stephen King Cast. And I can't do this without you guys. I love the feedback. I love interacting with all of you. So writing into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com will always be the best way to get to me. But also on stephenkingcast.com, there's a contact sheet that you can click on and send a message directly to me. Also, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram, on Blue Sky, and on TikTok. On TikTok, you'll find right now, at the time of this recording, the collection is pretty small, but it is growing. throwing just quick little lore bombs that I have left on TikTok, where I explore the connections between different works of Stephen King and things for you to just think about. So just condensing these podcast episodes into minute little chunks. So that has been fun for me to be able to do. So you can explore me over on TikTok, and look for more of those as we go along. And there will be more news on this over the next couple weeks. But if you headed on over to Patreon, there is a Stephen King Cast Patreon that is now up and running. So I'm going to be getting more content over there. So if you want early access to upcoming episodes, you can head on over to Patreon for that. And then if you want my non-Stephen King reviews of both classic horror and genre stories and the newest, you can find it over on Patreon. So I'm expanding beyond the world of Stephen King into genre reviews and pop culture reviews at large. So head on over to Patreon. The link is there on the stephenkingcast.com, stephenkingcast.com as well. So thank you everyone for that preamble before I got into Quicksilver Highway. So let's talk about Quicksilver Highway. Quicksilver Highway, it's a 1997 TV movie brought to us by frequent Stephen King collaborator Mick Garris, who brought us The Stand, who brought us the Shining adaptation, who brought us Bag of Bones, I believe. He was one of the masters of horror. So Mick Garris is a frequent collaborator and a long-standing contributor to the horror genre on television. And what it is a two-story tale. One is adapted by from a Stephen King story, and one is adapted by from a Clive Barker story. So the one that we get from Stephen King is Chattery Teeth, which was found in the Nightmares and Dreamscapes short story collection. And the Clive Barker story is the Body Politic, which I believe came from Books of Blood. So for those of you, this is the Stephen King cast, so you might not be familiar, but in the 1980s, when there was a horror boom, clearly Stephen King was at the top. But also over the pond, we had Clive Barker, who was doing something completely different with horror, whereas Stephen King was, if he was like the Marvel Comics, which was like looking outside your world, looking outside your window and seeing the world and placing the horror right outside there, Clive Barker was it's almost like an update onto a Lovecraftian mythos and approach, and it's very body horror. It's very sexualized. It's very different from Stephen King. But these two have always been very complementary of one another, both within their works of fiction and what they were doing with horror at the time, and as storytellers to one another. So it is fun to be able to get a Stephen King and a Clive Barker twofer within Quicksilver Highway. So let me just kind of give you the context of Quicksilver Highway. This is from Wikipedia, the production. So Creative Artists Agency met with Mick Garris about him writing the pilot script for a possible horror television series directed by John McTiernan and produced by his wife, Donna Dubrow. Who's John McTiernan, you might be asking? John McTiernan is someone that I feel needs to be talked about with much more greater respect. Yes, he had some financial crimes, I believe, and did his time, but that doesn't stop him from being the helmer of Predator, Die Hard. This is someone with some massive bona fides, and so for him to be a part of the television world, that is a name that definitely stood out to me. The agency suggested multiple ghost stories and urban legends to write about, but Garris had another idea. He wanted to follow a mysterious character who describes himself as only a storyteller, but is much more than that. Each episode would be set in a different location, with the same actors playing different characters. Just as Brandon Tartikoff signed on as a producer, Garris pitched the idea to his staff at American Broadcasting Company. The heads of the network weren't interested, as they didn't want horror material in their broadcast schedule, which is really surprising due to the fact that they had a long-standing and successful partnership with Mick Garris up until that point, with the various Stephen King adaptations, which were big hits for them on television. Okay, so then after writing a pilot script based on Stephen King's short story Chattery Teeth, Garris pitched the series to Fox. However, Fox wanted a 2-hour television film. He wrote a screenplay of Clive Barker's The Body Politic to serve as the film's second part after Chattery Teeth. Casting director Lynn Kressel, who previously worked on Garris on The Stand and The Shining, came up with the idea of Christopher Lloyd as Quicksilver. While the network loved the decision, Garris was a bit skeptical, reasoning that he wanted a little more seductive actor to play the part. In the end, however, Garris loved the decision. The moment Fox began developing the project, McTiernan left the director's seat on the project, leaving Garris to have to direct the screenplay himself. The Body Politic was filmed at Santa Monica Pier, while Chattery Teeth was filmed in Lancaster, California. Okay, so let's just get in. I just wanted you to kind of have that background as to how this came about. And like I said, because right now, as I'm reviewing this, the reason I'm doing Quicksilver Highway is to get to the episodes that I have left out. This is a blind spot for me, both as a Stephen King fan and as a podcaster of a Stephen King podcast. So this was... I just guess I wasn't aware of it, and this is in 1997. This is the same time that the Steven Weber, Rebecca De Mornay starring version of The Shining came out, and I was all about that. And 2 years later, I loved Storm of the Century, but this, for whatever reason, it just kind of came and went, and I just wasn't aware of it. And I have known of it since then, but just never bothered getting around to it. So it opens with a guitar sound that to me is just synonymous with 90s television. And we immediately meet our two characters, a bride and a groom stranded on the side of a road. But it's not just any road. It's a highway. But it's not just any highway. It's Quicksilver Highway, which is also the name of this movie. As the credits roll, again, what stands out to me is the talent that's attached to this. The composer is Mark Mothersbaugh. And if you're not familiar with this name, you are familiar with his sound and his song. I mean, he was famous for the 1980s new wave band Devo. But since then, he has been a celebrated composer of such movies such as Thor Ragnarok, The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, Hotel Transylvania, the 21 Jump Street movies, the Minecraft movie, which was a massive success last year, and he was a regular on Yo Gabba Gabba. I don't know if you guys ever watched Yo Gabba Gabba. Longtime listeners will know that I have at this point. She's not a kid anymore. She's about to be 10. But yeah, we enjoyed watching Yo Gabba Gabba, and for my wife and I, it was always fun when Mark Mothersbaugh showed up. So, he is doing the music for this, and that to me, it made me sit up and take note. And like I had said, one of the producers is John McTiernan, and it was written and produced by Mick Garris, who had just a few years prior immortalized The Stand on television. So, as it's beginning, though I hadn't really gravitated towards this, had been aware of it, cared to watch it, as these names are coming on the screen, I was far more interested in this than I thought that I would have been. This is and keep in mind, this is a property that had completely passed by my radar. I had heard of it from time to time, but I never paid much attention to it. So when these names started to appear, I got excited. And from a storyline perspective, what happens is the groom walks into town, leaving the bride behind on the side of a road. And as night falls, she's visited by a strange traveler by the name of Aaron Quicksilver, who is played by the one and only Christopher Lloyd. Now, the image that we get here, this is clearly a Clive Barker-ish type of character. If it was a Stephen King type of character, he would be just kind of like a normal person. You'd have your Randall Flagg type character, someone wearing like a leather jacket, someone wearing like a jean jacket, someone that looks normal. And the more you interact with them, you realize that they're not. This is different. This is someone who clearly is not your typical person. He's got a leather choker. His chest is exposed. He's draped in black. He's pale. He's got white lips. He's very unsettling. There is something inherently very wrong about this person. Do we want to call him a person? Is he a person? Is he a being from another land? Or is he someone who has dabbled in black arts and has been changed in some way? But when I saw him, knowing that there is one foot in Stephen King, there's one foot in Clive Barker, clearly this whole portion and the frame around which this story to vehicle is taking place, it leans more into the Clive Barker imagery than it does the Stephen King. While the bride waits for her husband, Quicksilver passes the time by telling the first of the two tales. This one adapted from Nightmares and Dreamscapes, like I said, Chattery Teeth. There's a businessman on his way home, and he's caught in a dust storm, and he makes his way to a shop on the side of the road. As he enters, we see Aaron Quicksilver, Christopher Lloyd, exit after he had been playing with a large pair of chattery teeth. He purchases the Chattery Teeth, and on his way out, he's propositioned by a hitchhiker. He agrees, and shortly after, he and the hitchhiker head off into the storm. I think that the hitchhiker is supposed to be a little bit sketchy, and he ultimately winds up not being a good guy. But more than anything else, at this stage in the story, the driver comes across as kind of a jerk, more than the hitchhiker is sketchy. But anyway, the two of them get to know each other as Bill, the driver, makes his way through the dust storm. It's a tense ride, with Bill being very controlled, opposed to the more chattering passenger, who eventually proves himself to be unsavory by pulling out a switchblade and threatening Bill. Bill refuses to give in so easily, and rather than complying by pulling over and letting the man have his car and his money, he accelerates, and in the struggle, accidentally goes over the side of the road. Having crashed, there's a struggle with Bill, still strapped in, and Brian, who is unstuck. While gathering his senses, having just gotten into a crash, Brian's attention is drawn to the bag from the shop that starts moving on its own, the bag containing the Chattery Teeth. As Brian moves to attack Bill, the teeth protect him. Brian starts playing with the set of teeth, mocking Bill, and it's just a matter of time before they come alive and start doing their job, which is exactly what happens. Because we know it's going to happen, and it just isn't that interesting. It's not suspenseful when the teeth attack. It really is just as goofy as you would expect it to be. It's a stupid story. It is inherently a stupid story, and this adaptation does not do it any justice. Anyway, Bill passes out, and when he comes to, the chattering teeth have cut him loose from the seatbelt. And when he stumbles out of the van, he sees the teeth dragging the limp body of Brian through the desert. Again, it is as stupid and goofy as you think that it would be. 9 months later, Bill returns to the roadside store, now with a limp, and reunites with the proprietor, who has survived the passing of her husband, who had been lost to cancer. As they discuss the fateful day 9 months prior, she surprises him by pulling out the chattering teeth, which had found their way back to the roadside shop following the events 9 months prior. Brian reunites with the chattering teeth and takes them with him as he makes his way home. As Quicksilver finishes his tale, there's a screech of tires outside, and they rush to find a driver upset because someone had run into the road. A hitchhiker. The bride finds the body of her husband, who had been carried but further off the road by the Chattering Teeth themselves. Okay, then it moves into the second story, which is The Body Politic by Clive Barker, in which we meet a pickpocket at a carnival, played by the trash can man himself, Matt Frewer, who enters a nearby tent owned by our host, Professor Quicksilver. Brewer is drawn to the Hand of Glory, a hand-shaped candle, and their conversation about the hand is fascinating and creepy. Now, this movie isn't great by any means, but there are little nuggets of enjoyment that you can get from it. And it really is just wonderful to see these two oddball character actors sharing screen time together. It's not hard to imagine their roles being reversed. And both could have played, each part very well. Anyway, Quicksilver then dives into his second tale, this time turning the horror attention from Stephen King to Clive Barker. Frewer plays a plastic surgeon whose hands take on a life of their own. In surgery, he uncontrollably starts throwing the scalpel, inadvertently almost hitting anesthesiologist, played by Clive Barker himself, in a little wink to the camera. The hands later take control of the wheel of his car and start driving it all over the road. Then, at home, if you had ever wanted to see Matt Frewer in a romantic bathtub scene with hands getting handsy, then this is for you. The movie then, it just goes for it. It embraces the absurdity of this, and the hands begin talking to each other. I repeat, his hands begin talking to each other. It's fun hand acting on his part. He's asleep, and his hands dance and play and mime the ideas of sign language, all the while high-pitched voices speak aloud whatever their hand language is. Again, much like the Chattery Teeth, this is stupid, inherently stupid, but there is some fun to be had from it. Later, the doctor's wife stumbles into the bedroom as the hands are talking to each other while he sleeps, and they strangle his wife to death while they plan on eventual freedom later that evening. Now that they have fully taken control, they won't let Matt Frewer use them to call for help, and he's tasked with using his nose to call his therapist. While on the floor, the hands attack him, and it's a scene of, I'm not sure what to call it, actually, whether it's body horror, body comedy. I don't know. I also don't know if I fully buy the plot premise, the rules to this. I understand. I guess I don't understand whether the hands have control of just themselves or if it's the arm, because I don't understand how the hands have as much dexterity. Like if it's just the hands, you would think that in order for the hand to beat about the body, pull forward, strangle, or get leverage, it's going to need assistance from the rest of the arm in order to gain any leverage. But the movie makes a point to show that it's not the arm, it's just the hand. And because it's just a hand, I don't see this playing out the way that it would. Does that make sense? Anyway, the hands drag him into the kitchen, wrap themselves around a meat cleaver, and then free themselves from the tyranny of the body. In the hospital, one of the hospital guards is then infected with the sentient hand contagion, or whatever it is that you want to call this. The hands drag the guards to the surgery room against his will. And throughout the hospital, the hands are taking control, and... Oh. Okay. They're taking freedom into their own hands. I didn't get how on the nose that was. Okay. I mean, that's stupidly clever in its own way. Anyway, back with Matt Frewer. He begins having a conversation with his remaining hand about the nature of identity and ownership and freedom. And Frewer is willing to kill himself if it means that the hand will rot alongside him. He can't defeat the will of the hand, who inspires his fellow five-fingered compatriots by shouting, "The revolution is at hand." And like I said, as stupid as this is, it's still kind of fun. He convinces the hands that he's the Messiah and to follow him into freedom. He then promptly jumps off the roof, and we're treated to an amazing sequence of hands jumping off of the balcony, shouting, "Free!" The button at the end of this movie is a woman's nose beginning to move of its own accord, all in order for Christopher Lloyd to inform us that she cut off her nose to spite her face. All right, everyone. So there's not much to talk about here, but I will say this. It's not good. It's not good. But I do love the premise for this. The older I get, the more I am drawn to short anthology stories. I love Tales from the Crypt. I wish that it was easily accessible to stream. I wish that there was more of that. The closest that we get is stuff like from the works of Ryan Murphy, who gives us horror shows once a year with American Horror Story, with a cast of actors who come back with new roles. So it's not really an anthology, but it's standalone seasons. Having a true traditional anthology, it's fun, and it's not something that we see much anymore. We had Tales from the Dark Side, we had Tales from the Crypt, we had Monsters. What else did we have? There were quite a few. There were quite a few in the late 80s, early 90s, on just like Saturday nights, where you would just sit down and you'd get 2-3 episodes, or like 2-3 stories per episode. Maybe I'm kind of misremembering that, but at least at every week you would have a new little bite-sized horror story coming at you, and I like this. I like this idea. I understand that in a day and age when we have such serialized storytelling, that it's not as much a draw, but I think that there's something to be said about just going for it. And so I love that Mick Garris did this here with Quicksilver Highway. Like I said, I also mentioned at the top of this that he also did this with Masters of Horror, which was exactly that. Every episode was done by a different master of horror, whether it was a director of horror, starring horror actors. And that was in the early 2000s. It's a great idea. I strongly encourage anyone to go out and check them out. Not every episode was a home run by any means, but it's a great concept, and I like that Mick Garris had this idea. I think that there's really something to that. I recently, having just watched It, Welcome to Derry, I did a whole episode about what I wished It, Welcome to Derry had been instead of what it was given to us, and one of my ideas was it just being an anthology show set in Derry, and having every episode be just a different life in the town a different life in the town of Derry, with the characters encountering Pennywise doing something horrible. I think that would be fun. Friday the 13th had this. Nightmare on Elm Street had this. There's really something to be said about that. So though it didn't manifest in anything, it's just what it is. It is just a weird little footnote in the 1990s horror television landscape. The idea behind it, the intention behind it, is noteworthy and laudable to me. The execution leaves something to be desired, but I like the idea behind it. And Christopher Lloyd, I believe, is miscast, but he's still Christopher Lloyd and fun to watch, and there is something very unsettling about him dressing so sexy. All right, so that's all that I have for this week for Quicksilver Highway, but I hope that you enjoyed, and if you have any thoughts, please write into StephenKingcast. You can follow me on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Blue Sky. And you can, for all things related to the Stephen King Cast, just head on over to stephenkingcast.com. and you will get everything that you need right there at your disposal. And stay tuned for more updates on the Patreon. So if you like what you get here, if you want more access to early access to upcoming episodes and reviews and thoughts on non-Stephen King related material, please just head on over to the Patreon and find the membership that you would like to subscribe for, and give me any thoughts on what you want, and I will see if I can tailor it to you. All right, everyone, that's all that I have for now, but may you have long days and pleasant nights, and I'll see you here next time where MOON spells Stephen King Cast.